This podcast is brought to you by Penji. Penji is a creative subscription service that gives you access to pre-vetted, agency-trained creatives from all over the world. From graphic design to illustrations to social media management and web development, it's all included for one monthly price. It's time to say goodbye to the hassle of searching for top-notch creative talent. With Penji, you get quality and consistency delivered right to your inbox every day, carefully crafted for you by humans. So meet your new creative team today. Head over to penji.co for more and enter the coupon code located within the podcast show notes.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Fully Managed Podcast, the podcast where we discuss marketing and business tips to help assist you on your business journey. I'm your host, Shannon, Penji's partnership coordinator, and I'm joined here today with a very special guest, Michael O'Sullivan from Motivation Media Inc. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, anything that you think would be relevant for the crowd, and how you kind of got to this point in your professional career?
Absolutely. So, and feel free to cut me off in case I go too deep into the rabbit hole here. But
Go for it. About that.
we actually, so in February of this year, we'll be celebrating 10 years as a
10 year
full
run.
service media production company. Thank you. So it started, it's the short way of telling the story is that after college, I went to school on a full ride scholarship, which is not me bragging, but that is part of the reason why I ended up where I ended up. And I knew after college I wanted to give back in some way. So I went out to South Dakota, became a radio host at a mission in South Dakota on a reservation, and kind of started this media journey. I was already dabbling a little bit in college and through a friend who had a production company back in Chicago. And the mission that I was working for, they saw me taking pictures one day and they said, "Hey, can you do this for us? Hey, social media, can you do this for us?" Nobody was doing any of this in the middle of rural South Dakota at the time. And they needed a way to reach their donors or, just anybody who didn't know about this place, which was pretty much the world. And so I had this playground to play with cameras and to play with marketing and fundraising. And after traveling for a couple of years after that, the cool thing is I met my wife through this process also. So we met as volunteers, but then we ended up fundraising together, traveling the country. And when we decided that we'd had enough of that, we weren't necessarily fans of the fundraising. There were a lot of things about it that we enjoyed. But for me, I wanted to combine these talents and tools that we had, storytelling being a key thing that this nonprofit wasn't using, and apply that to nonprofits at the time. And so, marketing, fundraising, like all of these things, it's storytelling. And so I wanted to combine that with doing something that I had a love for, which was photography at the time and video, and founded my company. And so kicked off the business saying, I'm going to build capital with social media marketing. I moved to Mobile, Alabama 10 years ago, unless you had a Facebook page, like you were kind of an exception, right? And so I was trying to convince people in a town where my wife was from, but I knew nobody outside of my in-laws that, hey, this is a good idea and this is the future. And after about 6 months of that, I'm like, you know what? I can market video. And so I started the video component of the business and really kind of went really deep in that and said, this is the way forward for us because we can apply this as things like social media become adopted in places where it necessarily hadn't yet. So a long way to say now we're a whole service video production company. We create marketing videos, a lot of short form content, but I would say between that short form content and storytelling, like those are our niches. And we believe that not just video, but story works in every industry. And we've seen that from the nonprofit space to manufacturing to medical. And I mean, just anyway, if you're trying to tell a story, like it works. It's just
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. So, when you were starting out in like a new space, how were you able to market yourself to people that you were kind of trying to look for clients?
sure. So it started off with a lot of hoping and praying and crossing my fingers. Um, Mobile, and Mobile's not an exception, right? There are a lot of cities where your name matters.
Mhm.
And I didn't marry into a family where the last name mattered. And
Mhm.
so it took a lot of hustle. And so that meant connecting with my wife's family and friends, and which opened me up to this world of networking and telling my own story and taking lots of meetings, or really just like I had to be very persistent to get to the point where 10 years in, we really don't market ourselves. This 10th year, we're changing that for the first time ever, but we really haven't marketed ourselves. It's all been word of mouth and referrals from previous business, but that didn't come without making those relationships. So by the time that COVID hit, I'd been out in this market and had made enough connections and had been preaching about this storytelling and video thing long enough, that people were ready, and they were kind of forced into it. But all of a sudden, it was that aha, this makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, cool.
You're doing great. And I think that that is a testament to community and making sure that you have connections there because I referrals are everything in this kind of business, agency business, media, anything under the sun in that area. I think really for business in general. And to have a good reputation is what goes most important in that area. So you need people to enjoy your service and like working with you, but also have good results. And so once you get that, you have your foot in the door to talk to more people who are related to those people and so on.
And you'll never meet everybody, obviously, but there was a fun moment. It was probably about that 4 or 5 year mark where I remember having a conversation with my wife and being like, I think I know more people in town than you. She grew up here. And I mean, there was a lot of people who I grew up for that who she absolutely does. But I reached a point where we would go out and I'd run into somebody and she's like, who's that? I'm like, oh, you don't know? So,
That's really sweet though. That means it's working.
yeah.
Marketing's working.
Absolutely.
When you were trying to advertise yourself in the beginning by showing good video, what kind of content were you creating that was capturing people's attention and was kind of delivering value in a way that it was showing them that they would want to use your service?
Sure. So I really, like I said, I sort of started in that nonprofit space, which also meant church space. And that's fine and all. But I reached a point where I'm like, this isn't going to support us long term. This could grow, but I don't think we're in the right market for this to be sustainable. And so there was a lot of that where I was just kind of doing this free stuff. But I think what changed our business was landing what I would consider our first big client, which was Goodwill Easter Seals at the time. And they were working with a development company out of California. And essentially their program was within this program, they needed a 7.5 minute long video. I'm like, okay, cool. But they needed to tell 3 stories in that 7.5 minutes. And I was already going down the rabbit holes of storytelling, but there's something that clicked in my brain working on that project. I was like, oh, we can tell compelling stories in a short amount of time. And it doesn't have to be a recap video.
Mhm.
We can move people emotionally to action, whatever, but we can create impact in a short amount of time. A lot of the companies that I had followed up until that point who, um, competitors, inspiration, whatever, they were doing longer form content. I'm like, well,
Mhm.
anybody can story if they've got 10, 20 minutes to do it. And so it hadn't clicked yet that, oh, you can do this in short form and it doesn't have to be a 15, 30-second commercial or a documentary. You can do this in a couple of minutes and really create, like I said, great impact. What was
So it oh, that I think that answered my question because what's really cool about that I think is that you challenged yourself to be able to tell a story in such a short amount of time, but that also kind of I'm assuming inspired you to do that in the future, which is really cool because it was kind of ahead of the time of now short form content is like the most popular form of advertising.
Absolutely. And so what it did was it morphed the way that we created videos into like let's tell brand like let's do these brand anthems. Let's do these things that are 1 to 3 minutes long and have high impact, and you can have it on your website, but that over time developed into. Are you familiar with? And it's not Gary V's thing, but I would say he popularized like the 1 to 30 format. Have you misnamed it,
Relatively. No,
but
it's
essentially film like a podcast like this. Document this 30-minute long. If you're giving a podcast or a presentation or whatever, an interview, take that one thing and turn it into 30 different pieces of content. And so he released that probably like 7 to 10 years ago, maybe longer. But that was another thing that when I was digging deep into impactful storytelling and being clear with your messaging, I was like, oh, well, we're leaving a lot on the table by just delivering this 2-minute piece. And you're investing these resources into both time and financially into storytelling or into marketing. Why not get as much as you possibly can out of it? And part of the reason that came about too was as I was growing my business and trying to figure out how do we do this better, not just how do we make more money, but how do we actually serve at a higher level? In a lot of forums with other video creators, one of the common complaints was that clients would come back asking for all this extra footage and them trying to strong arm like, hey, well, you didn't pay for that and all this other stuff. I'm like, well, what if it was just included? What if we created this expectation that yes, you're coming to us for this one thing, but you're going to get these other things as well, like these
Mhm.
15-second piece, 30-second pieces, because it's good stuff. It just didn't fit for this one thing that you specifically hired us for. And that has worked really well, especially with some of our bigger clients where they're just like, this just makes sense. Like we want it all. And rather than us having come back and do it, now they've got months worth of content up front.
So is this kind of similar? Okay, so if I'm getting this right, are you creating something that's long form that you can create into smaller portions of video, or are you creating all of this content separately at once?
So, um, so I'll just give you an example. Our biggest client, we will film several interviews over the course of 1 to 3 days. And then each of those interviews will get a 2 to 3 minute long form piece, if you will.
Mm.
And then we'll turn those into a whole bunch of 15 and 30-second spots.
Okay.
So that, and it really depends on if a team that we're working with has a marketing team or a marketing budget, beyond just hiring us. Are they doing it? Do they have money to spend on advertising? If so, those 15-second pieces have been serving them really well. Those 30 seconds too. At least that's the feedback we've gotten. We still will create things that are outside the scope of that, but try to keep it under a minute for, social media, for YouTube Shorts, Instagram, all that stuff. And anyway, it's just taken this, hey, it's collecting dust on the shelf and turning it into something that we all will win with.
Yeah, no, that's incredible because you have the ability to put that on many different platforms and you're also already in the mindset of working on that specific job. So you have all of these different pieces to create from this one piece, which is like if that long form piece or whatever it may be is not as successful, you still have all this other content created from it that may gain views or gain traction or whatever it may be. And it's also like people can try more things if
And
something
it's
isn't successful.
So, and it's different parts of the funnel, right? So, like those short form pieces are hopefully going to get you into a funnel. And then when you want to dig deeper, you can watch that longer piece and be like, now I'm really invested. So kind of how we look at it. And honestly, like I said earlier, like we've relied on word of mouth up until this point, but this year, um, we really want to become intentional and strategic about what are we actually putting out. That's kind of a goal by Q2, which I can't think
It's
in Q.
Well, it's really nice to have been able to not have relied on that for so long. I mean, it's definitely going to be a change, I'm sure, but it's really nice to know that you were able to build this audience through word of mouth because I think that's what everyone kind of wants to end at some point. Um, because that's you're not only getting clients that are adjacent to ones you've had previously, which usually means you've had a good taste in your mouth about them, they've had the same about you. um, so that means just more successful campaigns, which
Yeah.
is fantastic.
And what's cool too, in my opinion, is the like if we have stayed busy by word of mouth, what happens if we actually try? And I think that's
Exactly.
we have worked with brands in the past where I'm like, well, and we've managed their social media and their content, and they're like, well, this it isn't working, and a lot of that had more to do with it had more to do with I don't want to say that we didn't have anything to do with that, but it had more to do with like they were constantly restructuring and there were a lot of moving parts where it made more sense for them ultimately, and I don't think they're doing this at the moment even, but to have their own person on the ground and feed us some of that stuff so we can produce it. Um, we did grow their social following, I will say that. But they had built a brand over the last 15, 20 years that was going to be successful with or without us because they had a solid reputation. We were just helping add to that. And I'll always say, like, whether it's video or you put out a newsletter or a podcast or whatever, like these are tools and the tools have to work together. They can work on their own, but they work so much better together.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. I think that there's so many ways to market a business, and I think that you kind of have to utilize all of them. And if you really want to reach people, there's so many, and people think that it might be a lot of work, and in a way it is, but at the same time there's so many, like you said, there's so many ways of creating from one piece
Mhm.
that people don't realize, and it doesn't take as much work as it would to create all these separate pieces.
Right.
And I think people kind of, I don't know if they ignore it, but I think that they might think it's too much work, so, or it's too daunting and they won't approach it.
Yeah. And I think that's just marketing in general for people. And so when we talk about, or when we have reached out to people to say we don't have the time or whatever, it's like one of our goals, if we're working, like we're kind of a non-traditional production company, in my opinion, because our goal is not to shut down your business. It would be really nice to have that control and space and flexibility, but we try to be that fly on the wall and allow you to keep operating while we film and there are exceptions made, but we try not to shut businesses down so they can keep doing what they do best. Um, and so I'm a big fan of that of batching period with tasks. But this is one of those ways to be able to batch and produce a lot of stuff. And kind of our sell with that is, listen, we could do this once a quarter, once a month, whatever you're willing to commit to, but you're gonna get a chance to have that space to not have to think about this for a period of time. But it is a lot easier and it's a lot more efficient than trying to do this 10, 15 times to get 10, 15 pieces.
Yeah, no, and I think that it's nice to have that flexibility with a business as well, because I'm sure that it's not probably ideal for most of them to stop doing a lot of the things because this is going on. And I think that to even have different pieces of media in their back pocket when they can use it, whether they use it all at once or not, is something that is incredibly handy. And I don't think that it doesn't have to be something that's utilized immediately. It's something that maybe when they have the time or the ability to put resources towards it to be able to produce it on a regular basis, or where it's going to funnel down and create actual successful outcomes, they sometimes need to do that at a specific time and place. And maybe they were overzealous in contacting someone to do this for them, and they can't put it out at that time. But I don't think that it has to go to waste just because it's not the right
Mm.
time for them.
I'm a big proponent for even if you can't, even if you're not doing this for any time specific thing, what's the harm in having that library of content or footage? Yeah, like,
There's
it,
no harm, especially if it's storytelling. It's not going to change. It's
absolutely.
different from content being made for something that's topical, of course.
Absolutely. And as long as something, even if something is time specific, right? Like maybe not giving specific dates, but how many people have been doing this for years and they'll post some of these old clips because the information is timeless, like, or to reflect back on here's where we've come from. Like there's all sorts of ways that like you can repurpose content. Heck, turn off the audio and just show show you in action. I mean, there's anyway, I nerd out of this stuff. So
That's incredible. It's also very cool and a testament to you guys to be able to create timeless content, because I think that's something that is definitely difficult for a lot of people to do. And I think that because short form media is so popular right now, a lot of people are not creating that kind of timeless content because they're wanting to comment on things and be topical and be relevant. But I don't know if that's always the best strategy for specific companies. Of course, for many there it might be. But for a lot, I think, or for most, timeless media, I think will work like 9 out of 10 times.
well, a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of companies that obviously have the budgets to be able to keep doing this, right? Year over year, they're going to have the marketing budget. There are a lot of companies that don't. And so they have to be very intentional of if we're going to be investing this money into creating this stuff, we need it to work. And I've seen some competitors put out the trendy stuff, like not necessarily like the dancing stuff, the content, but like I would say the equivalent to that. And I think that that's a nice hook now. But the question that we try to ask internally is if we're going to be creating content for ourselves, it's not that we shouldn't explore what is trendy in the moment, but if it doesn't serve a purpose, then why are we doing it?
Hmm.
Because we just wanted to have fun. Okay. Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if we're going to be spending time and resources to even put out our own stuff, then hopefully it's going to do more than just get a laugh.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think a lot of people do worry about what's trendy more than serving an actual purpose. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with trends or staying updated on them. But I think that um, a lot of people, when they focus on them or center their content around those specifically, they sometimes miss the mark on catering to their audience.
I mean, unless that's your thing, maybe that's your
Yeah, of
thing.
course.
Cool. That's awesome.
No, I definitely agree. Well, I wanted to actually go back to this because I was really curious about it. Okay, so you said that you started doing kind of more things that were like pro bono when you started because that was just the space that you were in.
Mhm.
Um if someone has the money to do that and they are trying to market themselves or prove that they're able to do the work in which they're advertising, do you recommend that someone do that? Like, a do you think that's almost, maybe it wasn't a strategy specifically for you, it was just something that ended up working out, to build connections, but do you think that that is a useful strategy for people to utilize when,
You
like,
pro bono.
early on?
I
Mm,
mean, we still do pro bono work. And we've fortunately have reached a point where we don't have to. Um, part of the reason we still do is because it's community outreach. So it still generates a lot of conversations. One of the nonprofit we just did it was about Thanksgiving. Yeah, the holiday season, we did a last minute project for a nonprofit locally, and I did it as a favor to somebody in the community who is a community leader. And that's not why we did it. We did it because of good cause. But between now this guy uh, who manages a bunch of stores and this nonprofit who I think he sits on the board of, like the founder of that nonprofit is like singing our praises.
That's very sweet.
From their board is singing our
Mhm.
praises, and they just posted some of these videos literally on New Year's Eve. I wouldn't have posted at New Year's Eve all of the videos like they did,
Uh,
but they have enough of a following where one, I know we're going to be able to ask for testimonials out of these things, and we can point to how successful those videos were at poorly timed times. They still performed really well considering when they did this. And so, I think it comes back to those relationships that we were talking about earlier is that's why we still do it. We have a big event that we do every April, and some of the biggest, um, business owners and deepest pockets in town show up to this. We have worked on projects or just had casual conversations with people for months after this event. Like, oh yeah, like we didn't know you were connected to that. Like those videos were really good. And like we did those. And so like it's had this like ripple effect that wasn't necessarily the plan, but that's what it's become. Is we're able to almost reach a lot more people because they're invested in those causes than, if they're getting shown this online necessarily. So I think there's a ton of value to giving back, and I think you can do it strategically.
yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I like hear more of that in this space. I talk to a lot. I think I'm hearing it a little more, which makes me really happy. Because I think that um many people, because especially when they need profit early on, I think sometimes it's difficult for people to say yes to options in which aren't making them as much money when they need to make a profit. But I also think that a lot of people look at doing things for good that may not seem to short term benefit them. They see it as a cause that isn't worth it, and I don't think that's true, and I am happy to see more of this in this
Sure.
space because I do think that yes, think people should do things out of the goodness of their heart, but that isn't always a space that someone can be in financially, um, but I don't think that a lot of people look at it in a way of like, you can have something to gain from this regardless of whether that's your motive, for doing it in the first place, and having connections like that, regardless of if that immediate connection is making you money, there's so many other people that are around that can see that and see that you're making not only good content, but also that maybe they just know this person and they hear that they had a good experience from you, and that's so important and
But I
crucial.
think it creates a much deeper relationship with not certainly the people who you're working with and who you get to serve, but this community. Like when they find out that you're connected with this cause, I mean, full disclosure, I started this company with $1,000 of capital, personal money, and have been able to grow to a point where there were some really hard years. And doing the free thing didn't always make sense. And plenty an argument at home. Because, this is taking up valuable time. It would be easier to get that short win. But even when it comes to, and I'll tell anybody on my team this as well, even when it comes to the equipment that we invest in, like we're investing in years from now, not just for today. And it would be great to survive another year, but I want to survive the next 10, 20 years and either sell the company or hand it off to somebody who wants it, and whether that's my kids or otherwise. And I think that you don't get to do that if you don't have deep, meaningful relationships in whatever community you're serving.
I 100% agree. I think that long term building connections like that and strong ones are the foundation of why a company is successful or a business is successful. Obviously good work goes into that as well. But I think that you maintain a good and strong relationship by doing good work on top of that. So of course, that's crucial. Um, but yeah, I think that a lot of people are looking towards the short term of a financial goal that's specific and something that is immediate rather than building connections and focusing on that at the forefront. Of course, there's a way of managing both so that you're not overwhelmed in certain parts of life, especially financially. I understand everyone has different situations. But I think that's very, very important for the success of any business is giving back and doing as much as you can to help your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think I don't want to be one of those older people that says, "Oh, it's all social media's fault." But I do think that social media has created this mindset and where we have to have the instant gratification, and I think that y you have to balance that with this is still important.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree, and I think that is a great and wholesome note to end on because we are perfectly out of time. Um, but no, I really appreciate all your sentiments about doing good because one, I like to hear that. It's really nice to hear it more in this space. I think that again, like I said, a lot of people focus on more short-term goals. And making money is part of that. But I think that doing good can produce capital in the long term, and people don't really notice that. And of course, money is always the forefront of most people's minds. It kind of has to be. We live in a capitalist society, but I really enjoy what you do and how you started and that you're continuing to do that and that you haven't lost that way.
I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today again. And yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for listening or watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more hopefully wholesome stories like this one. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Fully Managed, brought to you by Penji. Check out the show notes to learn more about today's guest, and to learn more about Penji, the human-first creative subscription service, head over to penji.co. And by the way, if you're still listening, it would mean the absolute world to us if you were to share this podcast with a friend, and of course, subscribe.